Good evening and welcome everyone to tonight's meeting of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee. Before we commence the meeting, I request that all mobile telephones are turned off or switched to silent mode. Thank you. My name is Councillor Nick Stavrou and I chair this committee. I will start by introducing my fellow councillors. Seated to the left of the horseshoe table in the council chamber are Councillor Jim Park, Councillor Cynthia Watson, Councillor Felicity Sinfield, our Mayor, Councillor Wes Gold, Councillor Di Gillies, and on the opposite side of the table we have Councillor Lisa Hollingsworth, our Deputy Mayor, Councillor Gary Thompson, Councillor Jane Addis, and Councillor Susan Bigger. I also acknowledge our Director of Urban Living, Mr Scott Walker, to my right, and our Manager of Governance and Legal, Ms Kirsten Ritchie, to my left. There are other officers in attendance tonight and they will be introduced as they present their reports. The Urban Planning Delegated Committee meeting is being live streamed on Council YouTube to enable public viewing of the proceedings. The meeting has also been recorded and will be made available on the Council YouTube as soon as practicable after the meeting. The primary purpose of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee is to deal with issues under the Planning and Environment Act and the Building Act. This committee has delegated authority to make decisions on behalf of Council. And for those who are presenting this evening, when we come to the agenda item, it will be introduced by an officer. I will then call you one by one to come forward and address the committee. If you're making a submission, please present your viewpoints clearly and concisely on why you support or oppose the planning application. Please do not repeat what earlier speakers have said and keep the submission focused on relevant issues and points not previously raised. If you are opposed to the planning application, please tell the committee why you disagree and suggest an alternative approach that would satisfy your concerns. Please focus on your concerns rather than matters of history or detail in the officer's report. There's a strict limit of 3 minutes for each speaker, including councillors, and whilst as chair I can vary the time, I will seldom do. At the 2.5 minute mark, I will make this sound, indicating that you have 30 seconds remaining to conclude your presentation. For those in the gallery this evening, I would like to take this opportunity to remind everyone to extend due courtesy and respect each other and to the committee as a whole. This includes remaining quiet while others are addressing the meeting and not disrupting the decision-making process of the committee. Ms Ritchie, are there any apologies this evening?
Thank you, and through you, Chair, there is one apology for this meeting. It's Councillor Victor Franco.
Thank you, Ms Ritchie. We move next to the adoption and confirmation of the minutes. Councillors, can I please have a motion to adopt and confirm the minutes of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee meeting held on the 15th of May 2023 and 22nd of May 2023? Councillor Hollingsworth.
As circulated, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hollingsworth. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gold.
Likewise, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gold. I put the motion to... Councillors, is anybody opposed? There be no opposition. I put the motion to the vote. I declare the motion carried. Conflict of interest, declarations, councils and council officers. Are there any conflicts of interest that need to be declared? There be no conflicts of interest. We'll move to the main part of the agenda, presentation of officer reports. We have one item on the agenda tonight, 86 Wattle Road, Hawthorn, preliminary consultation outcomes and requests for permanent heritage overlay. This report will be presented by Mr Nick Brennan. Mr Brennan, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr Chair, and through you. The purpose of this report is to inform the UPDC of an application to demolish the property at 86 Wattle Road, Hawthorn, and to seek a resolution to request authorisation to prepare and exhibit a planning scheme amendment to place a heritage overlay over the property on a permanent basis. In March 2021, a request was received from some residents asking Council to investigate the heritage significance of Wattle Road, Hawthorn. Officers engaged GML Heritage to carry out the investigation, and they have prepared draft citations for a number of properties in Wattle Road. 86 Wattle Road was identified as a place of individual heritage significance. On the 6th of March 2023, an application to demolish 86 Wattle Road was lodged under Section 29A of the Building Act. In response, that application has been suspended and an application made to the Minister for Planning for an interim heritage overlay. To date, the Minister has not made a decision regarding that application. Officers from the Department of Transport and Planning have advised that a request for authorisation for a permanent heritage overlay must be lodged by early June to support the interim heritage overlay request. Lodging the request for a permanent heritage overlay means that DTP will undertake a merits assessment of the interim heritage overlay application rather than refusing it outright. However, it does not guarantee that the interim heritage overlay will be approved. The deadline set by DTP means that the progressing 86 Wattle Road to a planning scheme amendment has been prioritised. Officers carried out preliminary consultation on the draft Wattle Road citations from the 10th of February to the 22nd of April 2023. One submission was received specifically relating to 86 Wattle Road. The key issues raised within that were that the property had only recently been purchased by the owner and they were not aware of that prior to purchasing. The house is in poor repair and is uninhabitable. That they had proposed to demolish the existing property and build a new house there, and that the existing house is small and poorly sited and not impressive as surrounding properties. Officers also note that there have been a number of submissions that expressed general support or general opposition to the heritage study without specifically referring to 86 Wattle Road. Officers are not recommending any changes to the heritage citation in response and we recommend that the UPDC resolve to adopt the draft heritage citation for 86 Wattle Road and to seek authorisation to prepare and exhibit a planning scheme amendment to place a heritage overlay over the property. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brennan. Tonight we have 6 people that have indicated they wish to make a submission on this matter, 1 against the recommendation and 5 that support the recommendation. Once I've announced your name, please sit at the top of the horseshoe table. And if a submitter is not present, the next submitter will be asked to speak. I remind the submitters that there is a limit of 3 minutes. And the first submitter is Mr. Hao Ng. Mr. Ng, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and councillors.
Please come closer to the microphone.
Oh, sorry about
That's
that.
all right.
My name is Hao Ng. I'm a planning consultant. I act on behalf of the owner of 86 Water Road, Dr. David Nguyen. He borrowed to the hill, paid $3.1 million for the land without knowing there was this coming proposed heritage overlay. The owner did not disclose to him. He bought the land for the land value. The building is run down, and from his investigation, it cost more than $500,000 to repair the building to make it livable. Even at that, the building is too small for his need. And so we asked it to be demolished. This is not one of the cases like South Drummond Street, it was streetscape character. This one has no streetscape character. Just because the building is old, he wants to preserve it. And the building has no known architect, no historic person like Prince Charles living there for 6 months, or any known builder. Therefore, that kind of building could be found anywhere else. If you want to preserve this kind of building, you preserve the best, not anything that collects some dust. And you have asked the minister to allow an interim control based on Section 20 of the Act. In my opinion, this is not proper because there are procedures in the Act to put an amendment to fruition. Exhibition, panel hearing, scrutiny by minister, etc. And the owner has a chance to make a submission. If you take this cart before the horse approach, you put the begin with the end in mind. You put a death sentence on the owner's land, which is not fair. And I think that you should abandon the amendment, have some compassion. They put this way, this issue has been decided by the Supreme Court in the case of Antonio against Minister Roper, reported for AATR, page 158, where his owner held that. If I can read that bit to you. I just read quickly. If the proposed amendment is one which interferes with the basic use or development of the land affected, it would be an unreasonable use of the power to exempt a planning authority from giving notice to owners and occupiers of land. And in fact, it's a denial of natural justice. It's reviewable by the court. So I urge you, if one of you own a building like that, what would you do? You are all lucky you are not owner of one of this building, therefore you don't feel the hardship to my client. Please have some compassion.
Thank you, Mr. NG. Councillors, are there any questions? I have Councillor Gillies. Thank you, Councillor Gillies.
Thank you for speaking to us tonight. You said you're not the owner, but can you tell us in what capacity are you representing the owner, please?
Town planning consultant.
You're a town planning consultant. Okay, thank you. I wasn't clear about that. Thank you.
There being no further question, Mr. NG, please return to your seat in the gallery. Thank you very much for your
Thank you
presentation.
for
this
your
evening.
opportunity.
No problem at all. We now have 5 speakers that support the recommendation. The first speaker supporting the recommendation is Ms. Mary Drost. Thank you, Mrs. Drost. I think you know the procedure better than everyone.
Well, good evening, everybody.
Could you move closer to the microphone, please?
Certainly.
Thanks.
Is that better? Better? Enough?
No,
How closer?
very good.
Okay. Well, I'm sure you totally understand that I'm totally opposed to this proposal.
So, Ms. Drost, you're opposed or you're supporting the officer's recommendation?
I'm opposed to the development. All right, because council aren't supporting it, are they? So I totally agree with the council. I mean, this is a heritage house, and we're supposed to look after heritage houses. You know, when I was a councillor here, sitting where you sat, but this is long ago when it was just Camberwell, and I brought in heritage protection in the big area of Camberwell. And in all these years, there's hardly any changes. It's protected. And what I say, I've spent a lot of time in Paris, have you? I've often said this to you before. You know, I've spent time in Paris. If you tried something like this in Paris, you'd be sent straight to the guillotine because they protect the buildings, the old buildings there. Because that's why you as a tourist come to look, you know. But this is a lovely house. Why would anybody want to destroy it? Please, just tell them, get lost, you know. When people buy here, they should understand that we have heritage here. Okay. You know, I live in a heritage house. Now, I have a brother who wanted to have the house that I live in, and he was going to bulldoze it and put up a big block of flats, all right? But fortunately, the house was mine, and it's not going to be touched. It was built in 1880, and it has hardly changed since then. You know my house, the White House with the tower in Prospect Hill Road. And I'm very protective of heritage. That's why when I was a councillor, I brought in a whole big area of heritage. But that was just Camberwell Council, and this is in Hawthorn, of course. But I think you should really spread the heritage protection all across the city. You know, we've got to look after our wonderful, we've got a wonderful city in Boroondara, and we should look after it and not have it wrecked with masses of buildings and high-rise stuff and, you know, the sort of thing that they do. So just to make money, you know, not to make it nice. But we've got to make it nice and livable. So I'm just congratulating the council on their recommendation not to touch this Wattle Road house. It's got to be looked after, all right? So please, you support what the council want on this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jost. You may return to your seat. The next speaker is Ms. Christina Brannigan, followed by Ms. Merida Newton. If you could start with your name and suburb, please.
Okay, my name is Christina Brannigan and I live in Camberwell. I'd like to speak to the importance of the protection of this house for the proper conservation of the whole of the historic streetscape on Wattle Road. It's one that's been considered an important heritage street by the local community for a very long time. And I also want to speak a little bit about the impact of the loss of this important house on other nearby residents on the street who've carefully restored their period homes, both protected and unprotected. It's accepted by several of Council's own studies that there are over 45 heritage grade contributory or individually significant houses on Wattle Road and Wattle Grove. And Council has recently confirmed again that there are over 20 individually significant houses on Wattle Road itself. 20 individually significant houses on any residential, narrow, quiet street anywhere in Melbourne is a pretty clear indicator, I think, that we're dealing with a remarkable street that's obviously worthy of conservation. 86 Wattle Road's an integral house that helps to show the heritage nature of the architecture in the street and the story of this part of Hawthorn. Its loss would seriously undermine the streetscape. The slide up there shows you number 86 with its original garden, and you've got the houses to the left and to the right of it as you face it, looking at it on the street, and then opposite on the other side of the road, you can see the kinds of houses, and they're in fact all going to be hopefully individually significant grade. A couple of them already are. So you can really see that the loss of this house is going to really impact that section of the street in terms of its heritage streetscape. And with great respect for the owners who have just bought the house, I'm afraid I can't agree that we could describe it as a decrepit house that's less worthy than other houses nearby. It is a historic, well-built, aesthetically valuable house that needs a small amount of careful, caring restoration to the outside, which GML in their report describe as an extremely intact facade anyway. A modern dream home could be created inside the house and at the rear where there's plenty of space for a double-storey addition. And that's what many other people in the street have actually done. Many neighbours to this house, either side, next door and opposite, have spent a lot of time and money themselves restoring their homes to make this part of the street a real heritage gem. And I do think, with respect, to come in and benefit from that wonderful period character, but yet rip out something completely in character, is very disappointing for other people in the street, who've no doubt also put in their life savings into their home and wish for a dream home. I understand that property owners on Wattle Road were advised in mid-2021 that a heritage study was underway, and those whose houses had been identified for further work for possible heritage protection were also further advised in 2022 of this. Additionally, I understand at the auction for number 26 that several posters were placed outside the property informing attendees that the house was under investigation for heritage. And a question was also raised during the auction, and the real estate agent was contacted by several local residents to ensure they knew about the heritage study. I really hope that the house can be protected and the streetscape conserved at this important section of the street, and that options can be found with some good architects to renovate and create a 21st century home at number 86. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, Mrs.
Brannigan. There be no questions. You may return back to your seat. Thank you very much for your presentation this evening. I call upon Ms. Merida Newton. Thank you, Ms. Newton.
All good? Yep. Hi, my name is Nerida Muirda and I live in Camberwell, but I used to live very close to Wattle Road and very familiar with the street. I'm here tonight to support the officer's recommendation and thank you, Council, for undertaking the heritage study. We hope the community will finally see number 86 protected after many years of requesting conservation of this special Hawthorn street that holds so much history and so many well-designed period homes. The study provides us with new information and describes the house as having an unusually high level of integrity and intactness, and says that it is a fine, early, representative example of its type. It makes it clear that it is also important because it is in its original garden setting. No other house on the street is still having that. In fact, it describes the house as virtually unaltered externally since its construction over 140 years ago. 4 council studies now confirm its heritage significance. Number 86 was identified in 3 studies as being individually significant, heritage grade, or the equivalent to that grading system today. In 1993, 1996, 2012, and now in 2023, we have confirmation by 4 heritage experts. Local historians have already identified this house as of historic interest and included number 86 in the Wattle Road Heritage Walk that the Hawthorn Historical Society has been publishing since the 1990s. You can see this walk on their website, and councillors, I've made a copy for you tonight. Hopefully you've all got it. Looks like this. And see the front page of the handout for the information on number 86. The Society only creates walks for the most significant historical and architecturally fine streets, and the fact that there is a Wattle Road walk tells you that the community has long held this to be a heritage street. Perhaps we should be using Heritage Criterion G, which is about the connection local groups feel to places, to protect this street. Also, a past mayor and councillor of Hawthorn built and lived in the house. Charles Edgerton had the house built in the 1880s and was mayor in 1891 to 1892. He was a successful printer. Actually, a pallbearer at the time of his funeral in 1908 was the famous engineer, politician and philanthropist George Swinburne, who founded what has become Swinburne University of Technology, a key part of the educational pride of the city. The house holds much Hawthorn history and is a fine architectural example. We should conserve it. We appreciate that Birrendara needs to provide new homes. I understand that the street has provided at least 100 new homes in the last 10 years for Hawthorn, so it's been doing its best bit for densification. There are so many well-designed period heritage houses in this quiet street that we make it stand out as an obviously unusual historic place. However, somehow Wattle Road has not yet received the protection it deserves. We hope number 86 can be the start of the conservation of this street and that you will support its protection. Also, I just wanted to show you all a book. A local historian, Gwen McWilliam, wrote a book about Wattle Road. It's all about Wattle Road, this size of the book. If you get a chance, pop into the Hawthorn Library. It's in the historical room and you could have a look at it.
Thank you, Ms Muirden.
Thank you very much.
Councillors, are there any questions for Ms Muirden? There be no questions. You may return back to your seat. Thank you very much for your presentation this evening. I call upon Professor Andrew Nunn, followed by Mrs Montserrat Pesimenti. Thank you, Professor Nunn. Please start with your name and suburb.
Andrew Nunn, 78 Wattle Road, Hawthorn. Thank you all, particularly councillors, for allowing this to be addressed by the community. I was going to give you more of a dissertation, but people are far more erudite than I am, and I think the facts are probably on the table largely. I'd just like to say, it's just deja vu, in March 2021, exactly 4 months ago, this place was listed for demolition. And my concern is the community wouldn't know that. We could have been very helpful in having this meeting a lot earlier and maybe discussed it a little bit more detail. I'd like to know when Dwelp was contacted and this was discussed, because we've suddenly got the final hour discussion. Now, the issue is really that we've got a 2-year, I suppose, homework waiting heritage project. We also, as residents, have done a heritage study of the street with a very esteemed heritage expert, Graham Butler. And I think I'm not going to table that because you have got it, but it's important to read his particular dissertation on this property, because it adds the value that Nerida mentioned, which is the people that lived in it. Now, the other issues relate to the key issues. Look, I I hate to say this, but this issue of heritage has been neglected for a decade, but it's suddenly in the last year or two become a major issue at both council, with planning, the minister, and every real estate in the town knows about it. I went to the auction and I asked the real estate agent whether there was any heritage issues around the property. He said no, but clearly there are. The people who bought this would have known that, and they would have hoped that, as previously, this will go through a process where it will be, basically knocked back by the minister. Now, the house it's a time capsule. It hasn't been touched since it was built. That's what makes it so unique. It is very substantial, and I've had a few old houses, including one up the street, and this could be renovated into the most wonderful historic home facing the street with the original garden and having a renovation at the back, somewhat like 44 Wattle Road. Thank you. And the other issue that concerns me is we're demolishing something for what? Where are the plans for this property? And I think, I know it's the way things are happening, but why can't we see what is going to replace this? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Nunn. Councillors, any questions? There be no questions. Thank you. The final speaker for this evening is Mrs. Montserrat Pesamenti. Please come up to the horseshoe table, Ms. Pesamenti.
Okay. My name is Montserrat Pesamenti. I live on the street parallel to Wattle Road, Lisson Grove, and that has been heritage listed for a long time. Now, the spirit of Wattle Road should be preserved. The lady that lived in that house, number 86, used to work every day. She could hardly move. She would spend the whole day to go down to Glenferrie shops, and everybody knew that lady, just by sight. Now, I think she would be terribly upset if her place was demolished. So I commend the recommendation to heritage listed temporarily, but I really hope that Wattle Road gets heritage listed. I don't know how they missed it on the last batch of, I can't remember because I was part of it, but it was only a few years back. But there are a lot of houses of importance in that street. Now, this house, Christina had the photos there, is the third one from on the left-hand side from Glenferrie Road. Pristine condition, it only needs a coat of paint, and they could put the normal box that they put at the back of these places to put it up to date. But you shouldn't allow Wattle Road to have high density. It has been just renovated, the whole street, at great cost to the council, plus cost to the neighbours because they couldn't move very well. But it's a lovely street now. It's been landscaped. It's glorious. Why do they want to destroy it, demolishing the heritage that we all should enjoy and should leave for our grandchildren and great-grandchildren? As I said, that old lady that lived there until whoever inherited the house sold it, she took great pride in keeping it absolutely pristine. The garden was always clean, and I don't know if she had people helping her, but she was a very independent person, and I think she should be honored, even though I have been told we shouldn't go to the back of things, but I really admire her independence and the way she kept the place she lived. She lived alone, and I think she died very, very old.
Thank you, Ms. Pesamenti.
Exactly. Thank you very much.
There have been no questions from councillors. You may return back to the gallery. Thank you for your presentation. We've now returned to the officers for matters arising. Mr. Brennan.
Thank you, Chair. So there are a few questions raised there about the demolition and plans for replacement not being made public. In a case where a property is not subject to a heritage overlay, then there's no planning permit required for demolition. It is an application under the Building Act, which is assessed by a private building surveyor. Those are not a public process, so there's no exhibition or public comment on those plans, which is why there has not been, to this point, any publication of any plans for a replacement building. In the event that an interim heritage overlay is put in place or a permanent heritage overlay ends up in place, then a planning permit for demolition and a replacement building will be required. But until then, they are matters for the Building Act and the building permit process. There was discussion of the correct order of matters that we're taking here, that the putting an interim heritage overlay in place is unfair or an abusive process. The purpose of the interim heritage overlay is to ensure that a building that has been identified as heritage significance but not yet put into a heritage overlay is not demolished while council carries out that full amendment process. The decision before you tonight is to seek authorisation to commence the amendment process to put a permanent heritage overlay on that property, and it will involve public exhibition and, if required, a public panel process and further consideration by council and public testing of the heritage citation that has been prepared for that place to ensure that council is justified in placing that heritage overlay over the property. Anything else? That's it. Thank you, Chair. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Brennan. Councillors, there's an opportunity now to ask the office any questions. Councillor Park.
Just for clarity, the recommendation refers to attachment 1 and attachment 2 in paragraphs 2 and 3 respectively. Just in terms of the report, where are they? I can't find anything labelled attachment 1 or attachment 2.
Through you, Chair. There is attachment 3.1.1, which starts on page 10. So that would be attachment 1 to report 3.1. And attachment 2 commences on page 12 of the agenda.
So attachment 1 looks like that?
That's correct.
I just think for the sake of the community being able to actually follow these documents, it would be useful if going forward they were labelled in that fashion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Park. Councillor Addis.
Thanks very much, Chair. Can you please confirm whether there are 20 individually significant properties in the street? They seem to be said and then not quite said by one of the presenters.
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Or whether
just
there's
bear
a
with me,
number.
I'll check the exact number that is recommended.
So they're recommended, they're not actually...
So there are some properties in the street that are already in the heritage overlay, which are not subject of the Wattle Road study. There are a further, I don't want to guess.
And look, maybe that... And can you just clarify, there is an overlay area, but this one will be individual?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the recommendation for 86 Wattle Road is that it is an individually significant property in its own heritage overlay alone. There are 2 small precincts that have been recommended in Finchley Grove and Wattle Grove, which are side streets coming off Wattle Road, and there are a further 14 individually significant properties that have been recommended through the Wattle Road Heritage Study.
Okay, and, oh, sorry.
Sorry, through your chair, if I can just clarify. So it's a bit unusual that this property is being processed or progressed individually when we haven't yet considered the balance of the study that's been prepared for Wattle Road. We have concluded the preliminary consultation and we're still collating the feedback that we've received and having that reviewed by Council's Heritage Consultant, and that'll come into the chamber at some point in the future. The urgency with this property is that we have the interim request sitting with the Minister, and the department have told us that without Council making commitment to progressing a permanent heritage overlay, which is the decision that's in front of you tonight, the interim request would be refused. If the interim heritage overlay request is refused, we would have to consent to the demolition, which would then allow a private building surveyor to grant a building permit for the demolition, and the building could be demolished without being able to do anything about that. So ideally, this would be progressed as part of the broader study, but the situation that we're in is that in order to protect the building, we have to process this separately.
Thank you. And just one other question. There were a few comments about the heritage value of the garden. Are we seeking to protect the garden? I didn't think we were, but no, thank you.
So, no, there's no specific controls proposed for the garden. The proposal is that the heritage overlay applies to the entire property. So if any buildings and works were proposed in that region, then they would trigger the need for a planning permit. But the garden itself has not been identified as a significant element of the property.
Thank you.
And Councillor Addis.
Oh, sorry.
Mr.
As a
Brennan,
correction,
yes?
the deep front setback with early garden and pathway layout are identified in the statement of significance. So that's the specific, that round garden area at the front.
So they're identified, but that doesn't mean they're protected, does it? I mean, are we seeking to not allow them to change that driveway?
So within the heritage overlay, we have the ability to trigger tree controls, which is an additional control can put in place, but that's only really for the removal of trees, which doesn't cover gardens or paths or layouts. That would ordinarily fall into a consideration of buildings and works. If they had proposed to do buildings and works within that area of the front garden, council would be able to lean on the wording within the citation to say that that path is an identified significant element. So works that altered that region could be refused on the grounds that they had an unreasonable heritage impact on the identified heritage of the place.
So sorry, now I've got another. So should this go through and there be an individual overlay put on this property, would they need to seek a planning permit to do something to their front garden? If they wanted to do a new drive or re-landscape or any one of the normal things that we all do to our garden?
Through you, Chair. If they were looking to do what qualified as buildings and works, so that would be something like building a new driveway or, for example, ripping up that path and building a path along the side, then that could trigger a planning permit. If they're just looking to do gardening, as in like change a plant or trim a bush or that sort of thing, then that doesn't trigger a planning permit.
Councillor Addis, you have your answer? Thank you.
Yeah, I have got the answer. Thank you.
Councillor Park, again.
Those questions sort of raise a question for me. I mean, that circular path at the front, it's not suggested that dates back to the 1880s, surely. Looks more like it tracks back to the 1950s to me.
Very much working off the top of my head of memory of the citation, but I believe it's from the 1930s. It wasn't part of the original. It's been put in place since the original building was built.
So just to absolutely be clear, if the property owner sought to remove that decorative path, circular path, they would need planning permission.
In the heritage overlay, if any property owner of a property within a heritage overlay sought to do buildings and works in the front setback, that would trigger a planning permit. It's not unique to this place applying that control.
I understand that, but I'm clarifying that that is considered to be buildings and works, the mere removal or alteration of that path.
Yes.
And is there some way tonight for that to be excised, or are we stuck with that arrangement?
I think the short answer to that is no. The only way for council to exempt certain types of planning permit applications that are triggered under the heritage overlay, the statewide provisions, would be to include an incorporated document into the planning scheme, which sets that out. That's not part of this proposal at all, and that's unlikely to be supported by the minister as well if that were to come. Then the justification would be, why is that needed for this specific property when it's not relevant to any other property? Having said that, though, that a planning permit is required, as Mr. Brennan already noted, that is universally across all the heritage overlays in Boroondara, so all the 15,000 something properties. An assessment will still have to be undertaken as to whether those buildings and works are appropriate or whether they can be permitted because they do not impact the heritage significance of the place to an extent that would be unacceptable. So that's an assessment that estate planning officers will have to make at the time if such an application were to be lodged.
Thank you.
Councillor Park. Councillor Biggar.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, can I just clarify that on page 17 of the report, that figure 5 seems to say that the Metropolitan Board of Works detail plan from 1902 to 1903, where the garden is present. Is that right? So it must be at least that age, or am I reading that wrong? It seems...
Asphalt.
Sorry, Councillor Park.
It refers to asphalt. This, my understanding is this is concrete.
Oh, so you think that the original one you're saying was asphalt and it's been changed to concrete at some stage later, but in the same
We'll let the officers respond to this.
Sorry.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So to clarify, the way that the statement of significance is written, I'll just read it out. It lists the key features and the contributory elements. And the first one is deep front setback with early garden and pathway layout. So the focus is on the layout. So not the fact whether it's asphalt or concrete or crazy paving or pebbles. It's the layout component that is the important element to consider here. And that's the important element that the planning permit officers will have to consider, and Council's Heritage Advisor, if an application is lodged, to alter that layout, and decisions can be made at that time whether that is an appropriate change, if a change is proposed or not.
Thank you, Councillor Biggar. If there are no others, Councillor Gold. Thank you.
Sorry, it was a late press of the button. Look, this question in no way aims to diminish the historic importance of this dwelling, but I'd just like to clarify, for someone purchasing a building such as this, I've just flicked through the ads placed for it, and the agents have tried very hard to indicate there's no heritage overlay. How reasonable is it to think that the prospective purchaser could have identified it, and how many steps would they have to take to clarify that point?
So there's a couple of questions in that one question. So the first one, how reasonable is it for them to, I'll just confirm with you whether I got that correct, how reasonable is it for them to guess that it might be of heritage significance? Was that the first part of your question?
You could tie it all into the one answer if you like, but it's due diligence, I would presume. Is it reasonable to think they could easily do that, and how difficult is it to find out that it's either in an overlay or being considered as individually significant?
So if it is in an overlay, then obviously that will appear on the planning certificate that would form part of Section 32, so that's an easy one. Where it's proposed, and in this particular scenario, the property owners were notified in April 22 that council was investigating the heritage significance of the street. And so the timing for this property in particular, my understanding is that that was sold in December 22. So the previous owners would have received that would have had notification from council at that point that the property was identified for investigation, and not necessarily that it was of significance because the assessment hadn't been concluded, but it was certainly identified for them that it was being investigated for significance. Because of that, it was also identified on council's possible heritage layer. So if a call had been made to council, that information would have been able to be shown or told to any prospective property purchaser or any interested party.
So a prospective purchaser could readily have gone to council and established that fairly quickly?
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Gold. If there are no other questions, I have Councillor Vigor.
Just ready for a recommendation when you are.
I just have a clarifier, if you don't mind. Just the question that arose from Councillor Addis's and Councillor Park's follow-up, just because I wasn't 100% understanding this, and perhaps the gallery didn't understand it as well, that in any other property that's in a similar situation, there's the same need if you were going to make modifications to the garden area, regardless of whether there's a structure or not. Is that what you were saying before?
What I was saying is that every property in the heritage overlay in Boroondara has the same planning permit triggers that trigger the need for a planning permit where buildings and works are undertaken. Not every property has garden elements or garden layout or trees identified as significant or contributory elements. So not every property is in the same boat with that regard in terms of the specific situation of why a place is of significance, but the planning permit triggers are always the same in Boroondara, every property within the overlay, whether interim or permanent heritage overlay.
Thank you for that. Councillor Vigor, now would be the time for your motion.
Yeah, I'd like to propose the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vigor. Do I have a second? Councillor Park.
I'd be happy to second it with a slight rejig of paragraph 6 to improve readability, because I found that conglomerate fairly confusing. What I'd like to do with it is to put a colon after the word undertake in paragraph 6, first line. And make, that's right, and then take administrative changes down to become 6A, and break that at the word amendment there with a semicolon. Yep. And yeah, like that, just so it's clear. I presume that hasn't changed the intention of officers, but it just makes it easier to read and comprehend.
Councillor Vigor, I presume you're comfortable as well?
Under duress, I'll accept that.
Excellent. So we have a seconder. Councillors, is anybody opposed for the benefit of the mover? There be no opposition. Councillor Vigor, could you speak to your motion?
I would like to. Thank you. Firstly, I would like to thank the officers for this, this report, and particularly given that it has had to come at a speedier timeline than you anticipated, so thank you for that. This House has a strong recommendation for protection of a really unique and important property. We've got an in-depth and a clear proposal from GML and put forward by the officers. The history of this place, if you, as councillors would have read in the report, which I always think it's a great opportunity to have a bit of a history lesson into our community and reading about the deep connections, the deep German connections, particularly on Wattle Road. They go back a long way. And I was going to mention, and as one of the speakers did, that you may have noticed that the early owner of the house was a mayor and a councillor in Hawthorne, which is not the reason that I'm putting forward this, supporting this proposal, but it is worth noting. This is not a home we're proposing to save only because it's old. We all have seen homes that are old that do not necessarily merit preservation. This is a home that has been noted 3 other times before this as being individually significant or under the construct that we used in previous iterations. As the report has said, it is of very, very high integrity. There have been few changes to the original home. In fact, as GML said, it retains not only its original built form, its roof form, its brick walls, window and door openings and joinery. Original details include its bluestone foundations, slate, corrugated iron, hipped roofs, cast iron veranda, eaves brackets, raised brick cornice line, and 3 extant chimneys. There is a lot of this house that was built well over 150 years ago that still remains, or about 150 years ago. I think what's important also for us is that when we think about, for instance, the discussion we've had about the garden, and I suppose the discussion we've had in general about a heritage overlay does not mean that someone cannot make a home livable. In fact, some of the most beautiful, well lived in homes across our city are very old homes that have been well renovated and preserved, become beautiful historical homes. And I hope that my fellow councillors will not be distracted by the issue about the deep setback in the garden layout, which, as officers have said, is only a trigger. It is a trigger, but it is only a trigger. It does not prevent people making changes to their garden. And I think the other point I want to make is that this is the decision we're making tonight is about taking the proper process. We've started a process. We haven't been able to finish that process on Wattle Road. I look forward to finishing that process. But in the meantime, we have needed to step up and ensure that a home that has been identified as individually significant is protected, and that we ensure that is given the full merits review that it really does deserve. So with that, I commend this to my fellow councillors and look forward to seeing, hopefully, a permanent heritage overlay on 86 Wattle Road. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Biggar. Councillor Park, do you wish to speak? Thank you, Councillor Park. I don't imagine you have anything further, Councillor Biggar. I will now then put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? The motion is carried unanimously. Thank you to councillors, officers, and for your presentations in the gallery. We'll move next to general business. Councillors, are there any matters of general business? There be no matters of general business, urgent business, no urgent business, no confidential business. Thank you for that. Before I close the meeting, I would like to thank all of you who's joined us this evening, and I declare the Urban Planning Delegated Committee meeting now closed at 7:30. Thank you.